Hi everyone and welcome back to another video. This video is a compilation video on my series from 2024 looking at murderers who were jailed in a specific month of the year. And in this video I go through 94 people who were jailed between January and June of 2024 in England for the offence of murder. And I'll go through what they did, the name of the victim or victims in the case, the sentence that they received, and then I try and pick out something noteworthy from the case, such as the judge's comments. Welcome to my channel, Andy on Crime, where I talk about high-profile criminal cases and other aspects of criminal law in England and Wales. And if you would like to follow me on other social media platforms, I am on TikTok and my handle is AndyOnCrime1, and I'm also on Twitter or X and my handle is AndyOnCrime. If you do want to support my channel, then you can become a member. Click the join button down below and get some exclusive perks, or you can click the link in the box up here, hopefully, or in the description, and sign up with NordVPN, where you can get a huge discount on a range of their plans. And by doing so, you will be supporting my channel. So thank you. And then the final thing, and I say this in all of these videos, anyone convicted of the offence of murder in England and Wales will be given a mandatory life sentence. The only question is how long the minimum term or tariff will be. That's the period that someone will spend in prison in full before they are eligible to apply to the parole board for release. Some people, and I think there's a couple in this video, were given a whole life order, which means that they will never be released from prison. Those on a minimum term, though, when they reach the end of their minimum term, it's only if they satisfy the parole board that they are no longer a danger to the public will they be released. So with all that being said, let's get into the video.
First up on the list, we have Brandon Price and an unnamed 16-year-old who were sentenced on the 5th of January. On the 7th of December 2022, Price, who was 19, along with a 16-year-old, murdered 18-year-old Jack Norton, who was also known as Jack Lowe, in an unprovoked knife attack that occurred in Darlaston near Walsall in the West Midlands. Jack was with friends in a park when Price and the 16-year-old approached him. A confrontation broke out and Price fatally stabbed Jack in the chest. Jack's friends tried to get help, but he died from his injuries at the scene. Following the murder, Price fled but later bragged about the killing. He was captured on CCTV changing clothes and discarding the murder weapon. According to the police, Price showed no remorse and appeared to celebrate the attack after it had happened. The 16-year-old, who was also involved in the assault, was found guilty alongside him. At the sentencing on the 5th of January 2024, the judge described the murder as brutal and completely unjustified. Price was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 20 years. The 16-year-old accomplice was given a minimum term of 15 years, and reporting restrictions which prohibit naming him have not been lifted. At number 2 is John Berry, who was sentenced on the 5th of January. On the 21st of February 2023, 85-year-old John Berry murdered his wife, 80-year-old Edna Berry, at their home in Turpin's Close, Holland-on-Sea in Essex. Edna, who had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease in March 2021, was under the care of John Berry. On the day of the incident, Berry called 999 after attacking Edna with a baseball bat, hammer and chisel, resulting in severe head injuries. Emergency services found her alive but critically injured, and she was airlifted to Addenbrooke's Hospital in Cambridge, where she later died from her injuries. Berry initially denied murder, claiming manslaughter, but on the first day of his trial for murder at Chelmsford Crown Court in November 2023, he changed his plea to guilty. He was sentenced on the 5th of January 2024 to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 10 years. During the trial, the court heard that Berry had lost his temper after Edna kicked and scratched him following a fall. He admitted to attacking her with the tools that I've mentioned, stating in a police interview that he wished he had had a gun to make it quicker and better for her, indicating a possible motive of ending her suffering. The judge described this case as an utter tragedy, noting that Berry had stubbornly declined extra support despite being his wife's primary carer. The judge acknowledged the couple's 61-year marriage and Berry's devotion to Edna's care, but emphasised that help was available, which Berry had refused until the day of the killing. At number 3 is Jamie Lewis, who was sentenced on the 11th of January. On the 4th of February 2023, Lewis, who was aged 23, murdered 42-year-old Matt Portwood in Canvey Island in Essex. The incident occurred in the early hours of the morning in the car park of the Haystack pub. Matt, who was a father of 2, had stepped in to break up a fight outside the venue when Lewis stabbed him once in the neck with a knife. The wound was catastrophic and Matt died at the scene despite the efforts of the emergency services. Following the attack, Lewis fled the area but was arrested later the same day. CCTV footage, witness testimony and forensic evidence tied him to the crime. The court heard that Lewis had armed himself with a knife that night and showed a willingness to use deadly force, even though Matt was not involved in the original dispute. Essex police described the act as cowardly and condemned the carrying of knives as a serious public threat. During the trial at Basildon Crown Court, Lewis denied murder but was found guilty by a jury. The court was told that Matt was a peacemaker trying to defuse a confrontation and protect others. His death deeply affected his family and the community, with many tributes describing him as a kind, family-orientated man who had no involvement in violence. On the 11th of January 2024, Lewis was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 24 years. At number 4, we have Sian Hedges and Jack Benham, who were sentenced on the 12th of January. On the 28th of November 2020, Hedges and her former partner Benham murdered 18-month-old Alfie Phillips. Alfie was killed in a caravan in Herhill, Kent, after enduring a prolonged and brutal assault. A post-mortem examination revealed over 70 injuries, including fractures to his ribs, arms and leg, as well as signs of smothering. Traces of cocaine were also found in his system, indicating exposure to the drug prior to his death. The court heard that Hedges and Benham had been drinking whiskey and taking cocaine on the night of the attack. They inflicted what the judge described as a frenzied attack on Alfie, resulting in his death. Both defendants denied harming the child, instead blaming each other and attempting to cover up their actions. However, the jury unanimously found them guilty after a 9-week trial. On the 12th of January 2024, the judge sentenced Benham to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 23 years. Hedges was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 19 years. The judge criticised their efforts to conceal the assault, stating, "Your first thoughts were for yourselves. You lied about what had happened in the caravan, and you maintained your lies through police interviews and at trial." Alfie's father, Sam Phillips, expressed his grief and frustration, saying, "I never got to hear him say his first proper words. I never got to have a conversation with him. I was robbed of the opportunity to see him grow up." At number 5 is Alberto Fioletti, who was sentenced on the 15th of January. Fioletti, who was a 31-year-old veterinarian, was convicted of the murder of his former partner, Stephanie Hodgkinson, at her home in Bournemouth. The attack occurred on the 12th of May 2023, just days after Stephanie had ended their relationship. Fioletti entered her home uninvited and stabbed her 7 times in the neck and chest while her 2 children were asleep upstairs. He then called 999 and admitted to the stabbing, telling police officers that he had snapped. The court heard that Fioletti had struggled to cope with the breakup and had previously made concerning statements to friends and mental health professionals. In the lead up to the murder, he had left work early, purchased a large kitchen knife, and travelled to Stephanie's home, where he lay in wait. The prosecution described the killing as premeditated and brutal, arguing that he had planned the attack after learning that Stephanie had started seeing someone new. Fioletti initially pleaded guilty to manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility, citing his mental health issues. However, the prosecution presented evidence that his actions were deliberate and calculated, and the jury found him guilty of murder. The judge acknowledged Fioletti's mental health struggles, but emphasised that they did not absolve him of responsibility for the cold and shocking killing. On the 15th of January 2024, at Winchester Crown Court, Fioletti was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 15 years. The judge noted the devastating impact the murder had had on Stephanie's family, particularly her children, who had lost their mother in a violent and traumatic way. At number 6 is Harley Dee Thompson, who was sentenced on the 15th of January. On the 4th of January 2022, 46-year-old Darius Wolozar was fatally stabbed during a street altercation on Tavistock Road in West Drayton in London. The confrontation escalated when Darius, who had reportedly armed himself with a hammer, was disarmed by Thompson. Thompson then inflicted multiple stab wounds to Darius's groin and chest, leading to his death at the scene. Thompson was initially tried at Harrow Crown Court in May 2023. When the jury could not reach a verdict on the murder charge, a retrial commenced at Croydon Crown Court in December 2023, where, after 3 hours of deliberation, the jury unanimously convicted Thompson of murder. On the 15th of January 2024, at Woolwich Crown Court, Thompson was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 25 years, less time already served on remand. Detective Chief Inspector Wayne Jolly, who led the investigation, described the attack as ferocious and emphasised the devastating impact on Darius's family and friends. At number 7 is Raymond Lynagh, who was sentenced on the 16th of January. Lynagh, who was 67, was convicted of murdering his housemate, Dean Corbett, in a devastating arson attack in Torquay. The incident took place on the 22nd of October 2021 at a flat on Ellicombe Road, where both men lived. Lynagh set fire to the property in the early hours of the morning after a breakdown in their relationship. The fire quickly engulfed the building, trapping Dean inside. Emergency services were called to the scene, but Dean was pronounced dead after being rescued from the blaze. The court heard that Lynagh had deliberately started the fire using petrol and had also sabotaged the gas supply to fuel the flames. He then fled the scene and was later found hiding in a nearby alley. Firefighters described the scene as one of the most dangerous and intense fires they had ever faced. Neighbours had to be evacuated and several adjoining properties were damaged by fire. Forensic investigations confirmed that the fire was started deliberately and Lynagh was charged with murder and arson with intent to endanger life. At the trial, the prosecution argued that Lynagh had become increasingly hostile towards Dean in the weeks leading up to the attack. Witnesses testified that he had made threats and expressed frustration at Dean's presence in the home. Lynagh denied intending to kill Dean, but admitted starting the fire. The jury rejected his claims and found him guilty of murder as well as arson. The court noted his complete disregard for the lives of others in the building. On the 16th of January 2024, Lynagh was sentenced at Exeter Crown Court to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 24 years. The judge described the act as deliberate, callous, and utterly reckless, and stated the extreme danger Lynagh had caused not just for Dean, but the other residents in the buildings and neighbouring homes. At number 8 is Richard Smith-Slater, who was sentenced on the 16th of January. On the 8th of July 2023, 33-year-old Smith-Slater fatally assaulted 61-year-old Craig Gill at Blake's Bar in Newton Aycliffe following a dispute over Smith-Slater's Staffordshire Bull Terrier puppy, which was roaming off-lead inside the pub. Craig, a regular patron, had expressed concern about the dog, leading to escalating tensions throughout the day. The altercation culminated when Smith-Slater whipped Craig across the face with a dog lead. As Craig attempted to prevent Smith-Slater from leaving the premises, Smith-Slater delivered 4 rapid punches to Craig's head, knocking him unconscious. Craig fell backwards, sustaining a severe head injury that led to a cardiac arrest. He was transported to James Cook University Hospital in Middlesbrough, where he died 5 days later without regaining consciousness. During the trial at Teesside Crown Court, the jury viewed CCTV footage capturing the swift and violent nature of the attack. Smith-Slater claimed self-defence, however evidence showed that Craig did not throw any punches. Prosecutors highlighted Smith-Slater's lack of remorse, noting that he posted a boxing glove emoji on social media afterwards, seemingly boasting about the incident. The court also heard that Smith-Slater had consumed 11 pints of beer and used cocaine on the day of the attack. At the time, he was on bail for 2 charges of causing actual bodily harm, which were later discontinued. On the 16th of January 2024, having been found guilty, Smith-Slater was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 14 years. The judge described the attack as not a fair fight, noting Smith-Slater's youth, agility, and prior boxing training compared to Craig's age and vulnerability. At number 9 is Jason Gowen, who was sentenced on the 17th of January. On the 26th of May 2023, 27-year-old Gowen murdered his partner, 37-year-old Fiona Robinson, at their shared home in Chorley in Lancashire. Gowen called emergency services at 2:15 a.m, claiming that Fiona had stopped breathing. Paramedics found her unresponsive and she was pronounced dead at the scene. A post-mortem examination revealed that Fiona had suffered 9 rib fractures, bruises and abrasions across her face and body, and injuries consistent with strangulation. Initially, Gowen provided conflicting accounts to authorities, suggesting that Fiona had returned home from a night out with injuries, or that her drink had been spiked. CCTV footage, however, showed Fiona returning home uninjured, and video found on Gowen's tablet depicted her with visible injuries the following morning. Medical evidence indicated that the injuries were inflicted between the early hours of the 25th and 26th of May. Gowen and Fiona had been in a relationship for 15 months, during which time friends and colleagues raised concerns about visible injuries on Fiona and Gowen's controlling behaviour. Some of these concerns led to police reports and a disclosure under Clare's law revealing Gowen's history of domestic abuse with previous partners. At the time of Fiona's murder, Gowen was on bail awaiting sentencing for assaulting a former partner. In October 2023, Gowen pleaded guilty to Fiona's murder. On the 17th of January 2024, Gowen was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 20 years. The judge noted that Gowen's actions were aggravated by his prior offences and the fact that he had filmed Fiona in a degrading state after the assault. Gowen also received concurrent sentences for previous assaults on a former partner. At number 10 is Samuel Church, who was sentenced on the 19th of January. On the 7th of August 2022, 37-year-old Church murdered his former friend, 52-year-old Vincent Markham, at Vincent's bungalow on Farrow Road in Walpole Drove near Spalding. Church, who had known Vincent since primary school, visited him after attending a nearby wedding. Despite being intoxicated, Church decided to confront Vincent to sort things out, a decision that culminated in a fatal assault. During the visit, Church violently stamped on Vincent's head, face and body, leading to his death. In an attempt to conceal the crime, Church set fire to Vincent's bungalow. He ignited flames in 2 bedrooms and dragged Vincent's body into the front garden, later portraying himself as a hero by claiming he had tried to rescue Vincent from the blaze. However, a Home Office pathologist concluded that Vincent had died before the fire, with the cause of death being head and facial injuries and inhalation of blood into his lungs. Church initially pleaded not guilty to murder, but later changed his plea, admitting to causing serious harm but not intending to kill. He also pleaded guilty to perverting the course of justice by setting the fire. Despite an attempt to vacate his guilty plea, which delayed sentencing by nearly a year, the court rejected his application to do so. On the 19th of January 2024, at Lincoln Crown Court, the judge sentenced Church to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 20 years. In addition to this, Church received a concurrent sentence of 45 months for perverting the course of justice. The judge highlighted the premeditated nature of the attack, noting that Church had expressed intentions to inflict violence earlier in the evening. At number 11 is Felipe Figueiredo, who was sentenced on the 26th of January. On the evening of the 29th of June 2023, Figueiredo fatally stabbed 15-year-old Dylan Braga in Skelmersdale in Lancashire. The incident occurred after Figueiredo's wife's motorbike was stolen the previous night. Upon receiving reports that the stolen motorbike had been seen in the area, Figueiredo set out to locate it. He confronted Dylan and his cousin near a footbridge over Digmore Road, leading to a violent altercation. During the confrontation, Figueiredo chased the teenagers down an embankment and stabbed Dylan at least 23 times in the head, neck, chest, back, abdomen, and arms. Despite emergency services' efforts, Dylan was pronounced dead at the scene. After the attack, Figueiredo fled the scene, discarded the knife, and returned home. He called the police at 9:30 p.m, claiming he had been attacked by 2 males and had acted in self-defense. However, evidence presented during the trial contradicted his account. CCTV footage showed Figueiredo leaving home with a knife concealed in his waistband. A knife sheath containing his DNA was found at the scene, and the nature of Dylan's injuries indicated a sustained and brutal assault inconsistent with self-defense. The trial took place at Preston Crown Court, where the jury unanimously found Figueiredo guilty of murder, and on the 26th of January 2024, he was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 23 years. And finally, at number 12 is Peter Norgrove, who was sentenced on the 31st of January. On the 20th of July 2023, 58-year-old Sharon Gordon was brutally murdered in her home on Bromford Road, Holly Hall in Dudley, by 43-year-old builder Norgrove. The two had met through a mutual friend at their local Jehovah's Witnesses Kingdom Hall. Sharon had hired Norgrove, a recently qualified bricklayer, to construct an extension on her property for £29,000 with an agreed completion time of 2 months. However, the project extended over a year, leading to mounting tensions between them. On the day of the murder, Norgrove entered Sharon's home wearing rubber gloves, as captured by her Ring doorbell camera. Shortly after, the device recorded 18 seconds of audio, including a female scream and inaudible shouting. Norgrove attacked Sharon with a hammer, delivering 8 blows to her head, resulting in severe skull fractures. He then left the property with red stains on his trousers. Sharon's body was discovered the following day by friends who had become concerned when she failed to attend work. Following the attack, Norgrove attempted to cover up his crimes. He falsely told police that Sharon was alive when he had left her home. However, evidence contradicted his claims. Blood-stained items were found in a wheelie bin at a family address linked to him, and the murder weapon, a hammer, was discovered hidden in a shed at Sharon's property. Remarkably, after committing the murder, Norgrove proceeded with his daily routine. He picked up a child from school and later led a service at the Kingdom Hall that evening. This behaviour highlighted his lack of remorse and the calculated nature of his actions. On the 31st of January 2024, having been found guilty of Sharon's murder, the judge sentenced Norgrove to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 15 years. At number 1 is Alice Wood, who was sentenced on the 2nd of February. On the 6th of May 2022, Alice Wood, a philosophy student from Cheshire, ran over and killed her fiancé, 24-year-old Ryan Watson. Alice Wood became jealous at her fiancé after he apparently flirted with another woman at a party they had both attended to celebrate the birthday of a service user of the charity that Ryan worked for. This jealousy turned to anger and an argument ensued between them as they went home. Once back at their home that they shared together, Wood then got into her Ford Fiesta car and attempted to hit Ryan with her car, which she did twice, the second time fatally injuring Ryan as he dragged him along Sandback Road in the village of Road Heath before finally coming to a stop. After dragging Ryan 158 metres along the road, Wood then stopped and asked a nearby resident, "Please phone an ambulance, I think I've run over my boyfriend." Wood was then arrested by the police on suspicion of murder. At her trial, Alice Wood denied both murder and an alternative count of manslaughter, claiming, in her defence, that the death of Ryan had been a tragic accident. She stated during her evidence that she did not realise that she had hit Ryan and that he was trapped underneath her car. The jury disbelieved her and she was convicted on the 2nd of January 2024 of murdering Ryan. She was sentenced on Friday the 2nd of February 2024, where she was given a life sentence with a minimum term of 18 years. At number 2 on the list is Scarlett Jenkinson and Eddie Ratcliffe, the killers of Brianna Jahi. They were sentenced on the 2nd of February 2024. On the 11th of February 2023, Brianna Jahi, a 16-year-old transgender girl, was fatally stabbed in Colcheth Linear Park in Colcheth, which is in the northeast of Warrington. She had been stabbed 28 times, including across her head, neck, chest and back. The following day, Jenkinson and Ratcliffe, who were 15 years old at the time of the murders, were arrested on suspicion of the murder of Brianna before being charged on the 15th of February 2023. A number of pre-trial hearings were conducted over the course of the next months before both of them pleaded not guilty to the charge. Their trial commenced on the 27th of November 2023. During the trial, the prosecution presented evidence in the form of text messages that the defendants had previously tried to poison Brianna using an excessive amount of ibuprofen, resulting in Brianna becoming extremely sick in what her mother had thought at the time to be appendicitis. The defendants had allegedly poisoned her in this manner due to Brianna struggling with depression, meaning that no one would get suspicious if she suddenly died via an overdose of over-the-counter medication. After that failed attempt, the prosecution alleged that the defendants planned to kill her via repeated stabbings, with Ratcliffe saying that he wanted to see if it will scream like a man or a girl. The prosecution presented further text in which, prior to these attempts, Jenkinson was recorded as saying that she had become obsessed with Brianna and that Brianna was really different and really pretty. The defendants both argued that the other person was responsible for the murder and that they had only witnessed what had happened. On the 20th of December 2023, both defendants were found guilty by a jury. With juvenile defendants, the names of potential sentences to be awarded are different to adult sentences. So a youth who is given a life sentence, as would be known for an adult offender, this is called detention at His Majesty's pleasure for a juvenile. And on the 2nd of February 2024, Jenkinson was sentenced to be detained at His Majesty's pleasure with a minimum term of 22 years, and Ratcliffe was detained at His Majesty's pleasure with a minimum term of 20 years. Jenkinson will be eligible to apply for parole when she is around 38, and Ratcliffe when he is around 36. At number 3 is Carl Ellitts, who was sentenced on the 5th of February. Between the 25th of May and the 28th of May 2023, Ellitts, who was 26, embarked on a violent crime spree across Wolverhampton, committing multiple rapes, robberies, and culminating in the brutal murder of 48-year-old father of two, Roy Dealey Price. Ellitts, described by police as an extremely violent bully, targeted vulnerable individuals during this period, leaving a trail of trauma and devastation in his wake. The crime spree began on the 25th of May when Ellitts raped a woman who had approached him in St. Peter's Square. The following day, he raped another woman who had shown concern for his apparent homelessness. Both women suffered significant psychological harm, including flashbacks and anxiety. In addition to these crimes, Ellitts committed several robberies. He forced one man to withdraw £190 from a cash machine, dragged a cyclist off his bike to steal £60 and a bank card, and robbed another man of his shoes and £30 after threatening him with a broken bottle. He also held a blade to another man's throat in an attempted robbery. On the 28th of May, Ellitts spotted Roy Dealey Price withdrawing £10 from a cash point at a Shell garage on Tettenhall Road. He followed Roy and launched a ferocious assault, stamping on his head, face and chest. After attempting to use Roy's bank card at a petrol station, Ellitts returned to the scene and continued the brutal attack, kicking and stamping on Roy's head at least 12 times. Ellitts was arrested on the 30th of May 2023 following a police appeal and assistance from the community. He was charged with 1 count of murder, 4 counts of rape, 3 counts of robbery, and 1 count of assault with intent to rob. He pleaded guilty to the murder and some of the other charges, whilst a jury found him guilty of the remaining rape charges. On the 5th of February 2024, Ellitts was sentenced at Wolverhampton Crown Court to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 27 years. The judge described the murder as brutal and merciless, and highlighted Ellitts' history of violence and intimidation, particularly towards women. On the 30th of April 2024, following an appeal to the Attorney General's office under the unduly lenient sentence scheme, the Attorney General then appealed to the Court of Appeal, who increased Ellitts' sentence to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 35 years, less time spent on remand. At number 4 is Abdul Yaro and Kavian Vaughans, who were sentenced on the 6th of February. On the night of the 3rd of September 2022, 17-year-old Shay Gordon attended an 18th birthday party on Lichfield Road in Mile End in East London. Unbeknownst to him, a group of young men had planned a violent confrontation targeting him. Shortly after midnight, Shay was chased through the streets and stabbed 3 times, twice in the leg and once fatally in the chest. Despite emergency surgery performed at the scene, he succumbed to his injuries. The attackers, Abdul Yaro, who was 19, and Kavian Vaughans, who was 18, both from Tottenham, along with Danian Witter-Cameron and Giovanni Ade Johnson, both of whom were 18, had orchestrated the attack. Snapchat messages revealed their intent to confront Shay, and CCTV footage showed them loitering near the party venue wearing masks. Yaro was recorded discussing plans involving knives prior to the attack. During the trial at the Old Bailey, prosecutors presented evidence of a premeditated attack, and CCTV footage captured the group chasing Shay, who was already injured, through the streets. A video doorbell recorded one assailant asking, "Did I kill him, bro?" To which another replied, "Yeah, you did good. Did good." Shay's mother, Charisse James, described the moment police informed her of her son's death as every mother's worst nightmare. Shay was remembered as a humble and respectful young man. On the 6th of February 2024, Yaro and Vaughans were convicted of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 21 years. Witter-Cameron and Ade Johnson were convicted of manslaughter and each received 8-year prison sentences, and the judge at sentencing highlighted the calculated and brutal nature of the attack. At number 5 is Alagie Jobe and Hussain, who was sentenced on the 7th of February. On the 26th of November 2022, two 16-year-old boys, Charlie Batalo and Kiernan Solanke, were fatally stabbed a mile apart in southeast London. Charlie was attacked on Sewell Road in Abbey Wood, while Kiernan was found on Titmus Avenue in Thamesmead. The Metropolitan Police linked the killings to gang-related violence, noting that both victims were targeted as part of a planned ambush. The investigation revealed that a group of 5 young men, including Jobe and Barr, orchestrated the attack. CCTV footage showed the group arriving in a car that deliberately rammed into a motorbike ridden by Charlie. 3 individuals, including Kiernan Solanke, then attacked Charlie with large knives. During the assault, Kiernan was inadvertently stabbed by one of his accomplices. After the attack on Charlie, the group fled the scene in the same vehicle. Upon reaching Titmus Avenue, they abandoned the car and left the mortally wounded Kiernan on the pavement. Despite emergency services' efforts, both Charlie and Kiernan were pronounced dead at the scene. The Metropolitan Police launched an investigation, analysing CCTV footage and other evidence to identify the perpetrators. Detective Chief Inspector Kate Blackburn noted that the officers worked diligently to track the group's movements across southeast London, even when CCTV footage did not capture their faces. Clothing analysis, including trousers and footwear, were crucial in placing the suspects together before and after the attacks. Jobe and Barr, who were both 19 and from southeast London, were arrested and charged with the murders. During the trial at Inner London Crown Court, the prosecution presented evidence of the group's coordinated plan to attack individuals from a rival gang in Thamesmead. The court heard that Barr drove the group to the location and participated in the assault, while Jobe was among those who had attacked Charlie. On the 7th of February 2024, both Jobe and Barr were convicted of double murder and sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 25 years. At number 6 is Melvin Lebaga-Idubor, who was sentenced on the 8th of February. On the 23rd of April 2023, University of Nottingham student Lebaga-Idubor fatally stabbed fellow undergraduate Kwabena Osipuku during a drug-related altercation near the university's Waterside campus. The incident stemmed from a dispute over cannabis, with Lebaga-Idubor confronting Kwabena about selling drugs on what he considered his territory. The confrontation escalated, leading to Lebaga-Idubor stabbing Kwabena twice, once in the neck and once in the torso, resulting in Kwabena's death at the scene. Prior to the fatal encounter, Lebaga-Idubor had threatened Kwabena in an on-campus kitchen and stole a bag of cannabis worth approximately £1,000. He lured Kwabena to New South Bridge Road, a location he believed lacked CCTV coverage, intending to continue the confrontation without witnesses. Following the stabbing, Lebaga-Idubor sought assistance from his friend Antonio Hussain, who helped him evade authorities. Hussain transported Lebaga-Idubor to Northampton General Hospital, but left before treatment was administered. He then burned Lebaga-Idubor's blood-stained clothing and provided him with fresh clothes for his escape to London. Lebaga-Idubor subsequently fled to France with intentions to travel onwards to Nigeria, but he was eventually persuaded to return and was arrested. In November 2023, after a 6-week trial at Northampton Crown Court, Lebaga-Idubor was found guilty of murder and possession of a bladed article. The court heard that he had a history of carrying knives, including a previous incident in October 2022. The judge noted that while Kwabena was also armed during the altercation, Lebaga-Idubor's actions demonstrated an intent to cause serious harm. On the 8th of February 2024, Lebaga-Idubor was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 21 years. The judge acknowledged mitigating factors, including Lebaga-Idubor's age and lack of prior convictions, but emphasised the severity of the crime and its impact upon Kwabena's family. Hussain was given a 14-month suspended sentence for attempting to pervert the course of justice. At number 7 is Antoinette Shepherd and Kieran Spicer, who were sentenced on the 9th of February. On the 18th of June 2023, 74-year-old Michael Brady was lured to his death by 44-year-old Antoinette Shepherd and 17-year-old Kieran Spicer at Shepherd's home on Bowness Close in Coventry. Shepherd had befriended Michael, a vulnerable and ailing man, and invited him to her residence under false pretenses. CCTV footage captured Michael entering the property shortly after 6 p.m. Once inside, Michael was subjected to a brutal and premeditated attack. Spicer reportedly struck him with a machete, targeting his head and shoulder before stamping on his chest, causing multiple bone fractures. As Michael begged for his life, Shepherd used a blue rope to strangle him to death. After the murder, the pair placed Michael's body in a large television box and concealed it in a shed. They stole his bank card, withdrawing over £300, and they purchased alcohol. Their actions were discovered after neighbours raised concerns, prompting police to search the property and find Michael's body. During police interviews, both Shepherd and Spicer attempted to blame each other for the murder. Investigators uncovered messages between the two discussing plans to harm someone, including a text from Spicer stating, "I am on one, I am going to hurt people." Spicer was later found after confiding in a social worker about being asked to hide a body. The court heard that Shepherd had groomed Spicer to commit offences, and neither showed remorse for their actions. On the 9th of February 2024, at Warwick Crown Court, Shepherd was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 30 years, while Spicer received a minimum term of 18 years. The judge lifted reporting restrictions on Spicer's identity, citing a strong public interest in full and unrestricted reporting of the case. At number 8 is Jordell Menzies, who was sentenced on the 12th of February. On the 1st of May 2022, 32-year-old music manager Emmanuel Odunlami was fatally stabbed in the City of London after attending a private birthday event near St Paul's Cathedral. The attack was orchestrated by a group of men aiming to steal what they believed was a high-value designer watch. Unbeknownst to them, the watch was a counterfeit Patek Philippe Nautilus, which, if genuine, would have been worth approximately £125,000. The incident began when the security guard, Kavinder Heterachi, employed at the event, noticed Emmanuel's watch and covertly recorded him on his mobile phone. He then sent the footage to his accomplices, marking Emmanuel as a target. After the event concluded, Heterachi tipped off the group, who then positioned themselves to ambush Emmanuel as he left the venue. As Emmanuel departed the restaurant with a friend, the assailants followed him. Among them was 27-year-old Jordell Menzies from Brent, who led the attack. Menzies sprinted towards Emmanuel, brandishing a knife, and stabbed him in the heart as Emmanuel attempted to flee. The group then fled the scene in a Mercedes, taking the counterfeit watch with them. Emergency services arrived promptly and Emmanuel was transported to hospital. Despite medical efforts, he was pronounced dead shortly after midnight on the 2nd of May 2022. The City of London Police launched an extensive investigation, leading to the arrest and charging of the individuals involved. 3 other individuals were also convicted in relation to the same crime. Louis Van Dross and Quincy French were found guilty of manslaughter and robbery, each receiving 15-year prison sentences. Heterachi was convicted of manslaughter and robbery, resulting in a 13-year sentence. Additionally, Antonius Kafuri was found guilty of perverting the course of justice for providing a false statement to the police. Menzies was found guilty of murder and robbery at the Old Bailey in December of 2023. And on the 12th of February 2024, Menzies was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 31 years. At number 9 is Daniel Balaz, who was sentenced on the 13th of February. On the evening of the 9th of August 2023, 21-year-old Daniel Balaz fatally stabbed 28-year-old father of 2 Daniel Mixka on Newton Street in Barnsley. The attack was driven by Balaz's jealousy over Daniel's relationship with his ex-partner and their young son. Balaz confronted Daniel outside a relative's home, where he stabbed him in the chest with a 12-centimetre knife during an altercation that lasted no more than 11 seconds. After the stabbing, Balaz fled the scene and travelled to London in an attempt to evade capture. However, less than 24 hours later, he voluntarily surrendered to police in the capital. During the trial at Sheffield Crown Court, Balaz claimed that he acted in self-defence. However, the jury took just 50 minutes to find him guilty of murder, rejecting his defence of self-defence. He had already pleaded guilty to possession of a bladed article prior to the trial. On the 13th of February 2024, Judge Graham Reed's King's Counsel sentenced Balaz to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 20 years. The judge acknowledged Balaz's young age, lack of previous convictions and immaturity as mitigating factors, but emphasised the severity of the crime he had committed. At number 10 is Sam Deary and Sebastian Nevin, who were sentenced on the 20th of February. On the evening of the 15th of December 2021, 32-year-old Farhad Kahili was fatally stabbed while walking along Surbiton Crescent in Kingston in southwest London. As he approached the junction with Anglesey Road, he was ambushed by two individuals, 28-year-old Sean Deary and 15-year-old Sebastian Nevin. The attack was sudden and brutal, leaving Farhad with multiple stab wounds. Despite managing to stagger to Surbiton Road, he collapsed and was pronounced dead at the scene by emergency responders. The Metropolitan Police launched an investigation, reviewing local CCTV footage which captured the attack. Deary was apprehended shortly after the incident, having been mistakenly identified as a suspect in a separate robbery nearby. Nevin fled the scene but was arrested at his home the following day, where blood-stained clothing linked him to the murder. During police interviews, both Deary and Nevin refused to answer questions. However, the evidence against them was substantial, leading to charges of murder. At the Old Bailey, it was revealed that Deary had known Farhad since childhood and had orchestrated the attack, enlisting Nevin, who he referred to as a little cousin, to assist him. The court heard that Deary and Nevin had waited for Farhad, choosing a vantage point with a view of his family home. They attempted to disguise themselves by drawing up their hoods and covering their faces. Farhad was unaware of the impending danger and was listening to music and drinking from a bottle when he was attacked. The judge described the attack as a brutal knife attack on a man in a situation where he was defenceless. The judge also noted that while the motive remained unclear, the ferocity and intent to cause significant harm were evident. On the 20th of February 2024 at the Old Bailey, Deary was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 25 years, while Sebastian Nevin was detained for life with a minimum term of 14 years. At number 11 is Mohammed Mashar Ali, Antonio Affleck MacLeod and Aaron Campbell, who was sentenced on the 28th of February. On the evening of the 19th of November 2019, 40-year-old father of two, Ian Mia, was fatally shot in the head outside of his home on Nelson Street in Whitechapel in East London. He succumbed to his injuries 2 days later. The murder was orchestrated by three men: Mohammed Mashar Ali, who was 31 and from Dagenham, Antonio Affleck MacLeod, who was 32 and from Ilford, and Aaron Campbell, who was 32 and from Fulham. The trio were found guilty of Ian's murder following a third trial at the Old Bailey in January 2024. Evidence presented during the trial revealed that Ali lured Ian out of his home under the guise of a drug deal. Ian entered a Honda Civic parked nearby, where he briefly interacted with the occupants before sending a message to Ali stating, "Viewing done." As Ian walked back home, a passenger from a black Volkswagen Polo approached and shot him in the head. The shooter then returned to the vehicle, which fled the scene alongside the Honda Civic. The investigation uncovered that Affleck MacLeod had purchased a SIM card the day before the murder, which was used to communicate with Ali. Upon arrest, a significant quantity of drugs and a sawn-off shotgun were discovered at Affleck MacLeod's residence. During legal proceedings, it emerged that Ali had conspired with a prison officer, Victoria Bjuko, to pervert the course of justice. While the defendants were on remand at HMP Belmarsh, Ali persuaded Bjuko to fabricate a false confession implicating Campbell and Affleck MacLeod in a plot to rob Ali of drugs, suggesting that Iron was killed as a result of mistaken identity. Bjuko received £500 and the promise of gifts in exchange for her false testimony. Bjuko's fabricated statement led to the collapse of a previous trial, causing significant delays in the judicial process. She was later arrested and pleaded guilty to perverting the course of justice and was sentenced to 4 years and 8 months in prison. Ali also admitted to the same charge. On the 28th of February 2024, sentencing took place at the Old Bailey. Ali received a life sentence with a minimum term of 36 years, alongside a concurrent sentence for perverting the course of justice. Affleck MacLeod was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 34 years, including concurrent sentences for drug offences and possession of a firearm, and Campbell was handed a life sentence with a minimum term of 31 years. At number 12 is Simon Steeves, who was sentenced on the 29th February. On the 25th of October 2023, 71-year-old Steeves fatally stabbed his wife, 59-year-old Denise Steeves, at their home in Diamond Meadow Lodge Park, Western Road, Breen in Somerset. Following the attack, Steeves called emergency services and informed them of the incident. Emergency responders arrived promptly and attempted to resuscitate Denise, but she was pronounced dead at the scene. During police interviews, Steeves admitted to the killing but claimed he had no recollection of picking up the knife. He stated that the attack occurred out of the blue following an argument with his wife. There had been no prior reports of domestic violence between the couple. Steeves was arrested at the scene and charged with murder the following day. He appeared at Bristol Crown Court on the 7th of February 2024, where he pleaded guilty to the charge, and the court scheduled a sentencing hearing which took place on the 29th of February 2024. At the sentencing, the court heard that Steeves had no previous history of violence and that the attack was unprovoked. The judge acknowledged the severity of the crime and the impact on Denise's family and friends. Steeves was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 14 years and 2 months. At number 1 is Sean Pendlebury, Ashana Studholme and Lisa Richardson, who were sentenced on the 1st of March. In September 2022, 35-year-old Shakira Spencer, a vulnerable mother of 2 living in West London, fell under the influence of her former neighbour Studholme. Over several months, Shakira was brutally coerced, isolated and abused by Studholme, her partner Pendlebury and their friend Lisa Richardson. Evidence at trial revealed that Shakira was starved, beaten, forced into sex work and treated as a slave within her own home. The trio scalded her feet, fed her ketchup sachets and subjected her to intense physical and emotional torture over an extended period. At times, Shakira was locked in a cupboard and forced to clean her abuser's home early in the morning. She lost significant weight, going from a healthy size 16 to a skeletal size 6, and endured scalding burns, blunt force trauma, and electric shocks via makeshift blowtorches. Around the 12th of September 2022, Shakira was beaten to the brink of death and transported in the boot of a car back to her flat. There, the killers locked her in a hallway cupboard and left her to die. Her decomposed body was discovered 2 weeks later. Police had only entered after neighbours reported maggots emerging from under her door. Police uncovered CCTV footage showing the 3 returning to Shakira's flat multiple times to clean and conceal evidence. Cell phone records included videos and messages of the torture, while bank transaction logs revealed that they had used her money to buy cleaning supplies, in an attempt to erase traces of their crime. At the Old Bailey in December 2023, a jury convicted Pendlebury, who was 25, Studholme, who was 39, and Richardson, who was 43, of both murder and preventing a lawful burial. Prosecutors and the judge described their actions as sadistic, calculating, and devoid of any remorse. On the 1st of March 2024, all three were sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 34 years. The judge, Angela Rafferty, King's Counsel, condemned their conduct as an orgy of violence that was marked by extreme torture and a total lack of empathy. Each of them also received an additional 5 years for preventing a lawful burial, which will run alongside their sentence for murder. At number 2 on the list is Marcus Osborne, who was sentenced on the 1st of March. On the 15th of May 2023, Osborne stabbed to death his former partner, Katie Heighton, in the front hall of the house that they used to share together. She was stabbed 99 times. Not content with killing her, Osborne then used Katie's phone to lure her new partner, Stephen Harnett, to the house. When Stephen arrived, Osborne stabbed him to death as he had Katie before. The house where the murders were committed had 4 children upstairs, and another victim was being held captive by Osborne at knife point. After the murders, Osborne then laughed and jeered before raping the woman, telling her it was the last time he was going to be having sex in a long time. Finally, Osborne called a neighbour over and showed her the bodies, much to her horror, with Osborne appearing to be proud of what he had done. Osborne was later arrested and charged with the murders of Katie Heighton, Stephen Harnett, and the false imprisonment and rape of an unnamed third female. Osborne pleaded guilty to all 4 offences. At the sentencing on the 1st of March 2024, the judge found that the motivation for both killings was sexual in nature and driven by sexual jealousy of Katie's new relationship with Stephen, and the judge also found that the murders involved overtly sexual acts by Osborne. As a result, the judge found that the murders were of exceptionally high seriousness and attracted a starting point of a whole life order. He was sentenced to 2 whole life orders, as well as a 10-year sentence for the rape of the other female. Marcus Osborne will never be released from prison. At number 3 is Joshua Jakes, who was sentenced on the 1st of March. In the early hours of the 25th of April 2022, 29-year-old Joshua Jakes carried out a brutally violent stabbing at his girlfriend's home in Bermondsey in South London. He killed his girlfriend Samantha Drummonds, who was 27, her mother Tanisha Ofori Akufo, who was 45, her grandmother Dolet Hill, who was 64, and Dolet's partner Denton Burke, who was 58. The scenes were described as a bloodbath, with Denton found at the foot of the stairs, and Samantha found with her mother and grandmother together in the kitchen. During the attack, Jakes was reportedly under the influence of alcohol and drugs, including smoking approximately 3 grams of high-potency skunk cannabis per day. He later described the killings as a sacrifice and showed signs of extreme mental disturbance, and at the scene he was found naked, praying fervently in the bathroom and crying out religious-themed pleas. Police were called following neighbour reports, and they found Jakes at the scene. He was subsequently arrested and stood trial at the Old Bailey in December 2023. Jakes admitted to manslaughter but denied murder, claiming diminished responsibility due to mental health issues. Following a 3-week trial, the jury took just 2 hours to find him guilty of 4 counts of murder. On the 1st of March 2024, the judge sentenced Jakes to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 46 years. The judge explicitly linked the severity of the crimes to his drug-induced psychosis and issued a stark warning about the impact of cannabis. A subsequent review by the Chief Inspector of Probation revealed serious failings in supervision. At the time, he had been on probation for a previous drug offence and was required to engage with drug treatment. No intervention was arranged, and there were missed opportunities to recall him to custody. Concerns regarding his mental health went unaddressed, and no follow-up risk assessment was completed. The probation service responded with a plan to implement 8 key recommendations, to safeguard against similar failures. At number 4 is Ian Connell, who was sentenced on the 6th of March. In the early hours of the 22nd of August 2023, the police were called to a suspected burglary at a home on Ainsworth Road in Ratcliffe in Greater Manchester. A postman had witnessed a man climbing through a kitchen window and emerging with a white labradoodle named Layla. Inside the house, officers discovered 45-year-old Donald Prentice Patience, a loving father of 3 and statistician, found deceased at the foot of his stairs. He had been strangled and wrapped in a duvet. A post-mortem examination estimated his time of death at around the 19th of August. 39-year-old Connell, a crack and heroin addict, was arrested nearby with Layla and Mr. Patient's personal documents. He falsely claimed his friend had given him permission to enter and take the dog. Connell spun multiple inconsistent stories about his entry and Donald's whereabouts. A witness overheard him confessing, and CCTV, phone records and witness testimony pieced together a picture of a premeditated betrayal. The court heard that Connell had befriended Donald, who he called Boss, performing odd jobs and walking his dog. Their relationship soured when the financial support abruptly stopped, leading to a fatal fit of rage. Following a week-long trial at Manchester Crown Court, a jury unanimously found Connell guilty of murder on the 29th of February 2024. The evidence of betrayal and strangulation under the weight of addiction was compelling in the prosecution's argument. On the 6th of May 2024, Connell was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 19 years. The judge condemned the callousness and exploitation of a vulnerable victim, stressing that this was not a property crime, but a deeply personal and violent betrayal. At number 5 is Sheldon Rodriguez, who was sentenced on the 8th of March. Rodriguez, who was aged 30 and was working as a cargo handler near Heathrow, developed a deep obsession with his housemate, 39-year-old Stephanie Hansen, after she rejected his romantic advances and began a relationship with a married co-worker from Swissport. The feelings of jealousy and rejection drove him to monitor her every move. Over the course of roughly 7 years, Rodriguez covertly installed listening devices throughout their shared home. Investigators determined that he'd spent approximately 158 hours spying on her activities from behind hidden electronics, closely monitoring her relationship with her boyfriend. He also sent threatening messages, once posing as celebrity chef Jamie Oliver, and contacted employers to complain about her boyfriend. Rodriguez's acts included paying someone £100 to follow her partner, evidencing not just obsession, but active stalking. On the morning of the 30th of December 2022, after discovering via his spy devices that Stephanie's boyfriend had been at the house, Rodriguez returned from his night shift and exploded with rage. He brutally attacked Stephanie in her bedroom, stabbing her around 20 times in the neck and repeatedly bashing her head and face with a hairdryer and a large fan. Stephanie tragically died at the scene. After the killing, Rodriguez tried to shift the blame onto her boyfriend, claiming that he'd found the body. He attempted to explain injuries on his hands as coming from carving a chicken. CCTV evidence, however, showed that they were sustained post-attack. He even sent messages from her phone to suggest she was elsewhere. In January 2024, Rodriguez was convicted of murder at the Old Bailey. The prosecution showcased overwhelming evidence, surveillance recordings, forensic injuries, and his extensive campaign of stalking and intimidation, and a jury found his actions to be deliberate and sustained. On the 8th of March 2024, the judge sentenced Rodriguez to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 25 years. During the sentencing, the judge condemned his campaign of harassment and intimidation and described the attacks as sustained and ferocious. Stephanie's mother spoke directly to him, saying, "You took her life and you stole her future." At number 6 is Alfie Hammett and Joshua Howell, who were sentenced on the 11th of March. On the 17th of January 2023, 18-year-old Raymond James Quigley from Wymondham in Norfolk, also known as drill rapper James, was walking through Westgate Street in Ipswich when he was fatally stabbed in broad daylight. He staggered into a nearby shop, but tragically collapsed and died from his wounds. CCTV footage captured 19-year-old Hammett running directly at Raymond with a knife and stabbing him multiple times, while 18-year-old Howell chased Raymond's friends through a nearby clothing store, again with a machete. The court heard that the attack was retribution linked to a deep-seated gang rivalry. Raymond was associated with the Only the Money gang, Hammett with Third Side based in Norwich, and Howell with the IP3 gang from Ipswich, with the assault seen as a revenge killing. After a 5-week trial at Ipswich Crown Court, both defendants were convicted on the 26th of January 2024 of murder and possession of an offensive weapon. The prosecutor described the incident as a targeted attack carried out in retribution for another gang-related killing. The officer in the case called the crime a horrific and completely senseless act of extreme violence committed in full public view. On the 11th of March 2024 at Ipswich Crown Court, Hammett was handed a life sentence with a minimum term of 24 years, while Howell received a life sentence with a minimum term of 20 years. At number 7 is Kieran Claffey, Leighton Tabone and Justin Roach, who were sentenced on the 12th of March. On the 25th of February 2023, 64-year-old Mark Nope opened his flat door at Warburton Road in Southampton, expecting a delivery, to discover instead a group of masked intruders. The men, who believed they were breaking into a nearby apartment, threatened him with a gun and stabbed him in the chest. Mark managed to dial 999 before succumbing to his injuries less than an hour later. The group had intended to target flat number 157, believed to contain cash and cannabis. Unbeknownst to them, they had entered the wrong door, flat 147, and CCTV footage and testimony revealed that they forced their way into Mark's home, brandishing weapons and demanding valuables before the fatal stabbing. Hampshire Police, alongside the Crown Prosecution Service in Wessex, built their case using CCTV, phone data, witness accounts and DNA evidence. Prosecutors argued that the defendants had planned the robbery and were fully responsible for the death, even if only one man delivered the fatal blow. After a trial at Winchester Crown Court, Claffey, Tabone and Roach were all convicted of murder. 2 other men, Bradley Odell and Aaron Morgan, were found guilty of manslaughter and conspiracy to rob, and 2 additional individuals had earlier pleaded guilty to the offence of conspiracy to rob. In court, Mark's family described him as kind, much loved and cherished, and his sister-in-law said that the tragedy injected poison into their beautiful innocent lives, marking a void still felt nearly a year on. On the 12th of March 2024 at Winchester Crown Court, Claffey was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 29 years. Tabone and Roach each received a life sentence with a minimum term of 27 years. At number 8 is Lee Clark, who was sentenced on the 12th of March. On New Year's Eve in 2022, a dog walker discovered human remains at Oakwood Pond in Harlow in Essex. Over the following days, police uncovered more body parts, some dismembered, in several local ponds and reservoirs, prompting a major murder investigation. Forensic analysis positively identified the deceased as 59-year-old Philip Lewis, known locally as Scottish Phil, who had disappeared in mid-November of 2022 and had not been reported missing. On the 4th of January 2023, Essex police arrested 56-year-old Lee Clark at his home in Harlow. Investigators discovered bloodstains, power tools, and evidence of attempts to dispose of a body, alongside CCTV footage showing Clark removing large bags from his flat. Clark denied wrongdoing, claiming the blood was from an innocuous mirror accident. However, after a 4-week trial at Chelmsford Crown Court, a jury unanimously found him guilty of murder on the 8th of March 2024. Detective Superintendent Rob Kirby described Clark as a killer and a coward, condemning his refusal to disclose why he killed Scottish Phil or where all of the body parts were hidden, deepening the victim's family's anguish. Philip's son, Connor Lewis, paid tribute to his father, depicting him as a kind, caring and friendly man whose absence will forever change the family. On the 12th of March 2024, Clark was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 19 years. At number 9 is Kyle Gordon, who was sentenced on the 14th of March. In the early hours of the 17th of March 2018, 23-year-old student Russell Jordan Jones stood in South Street, Ponders End in Enfield, socialising with friends. A group of masked men armed with a sawn-off shotgun and knives suddenly approached and launched a brutal attack. Russell was shot once in the abdomen and stabbed 12 times. His friend Karun Singh was also stabbed, but he survived. Investigators concluded that the attack was gang-motivated. CCTV footage and phone data revealed the men had driven around enemy territory searching for rival members, ultimately targeting victims based on mistaken identity. Russell and his friends were not involved in any gang activity. Following arrests, 3 men, Bilkener, Quayanu and Williams, were convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment, with minimum terms between 25 and 29 years. Gordon also faced a trial at the Old Bailey, but the jury failed to reach a verdict during his first hearing in June 2023. Gordon, who was aged 24 at the time of the retrial, stood trial again in March of 2024. After a thorough presentation of the evidence, including weapons used, CCTV footage and phone records, the jury convicted him of murder and grievous bodily harm to Singh, as well as possession of a firearm with intent. The prosecutor described the attack as a calculated and deliberate hunting of rival gang members. Russell's mother, Stephanie Saunders, delivered a powerful statement during sentencing, stating her son was defenceless and very unaware of what was about to happen. She shared that she can never forgive those responsible for taking his life in the most brutal, vicious and senseless way. On the 14th of March 2024, the judge sentenced Gordon to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 28 years. He also received concurrent sentences of 9 years for causing grievous bodily harm and 14 years for firearm possession, both to be served alongside his murder term. At number 10 is Shannon Grant, who was sentenced on the 21st of March. On the 22nd of June 2023, 40-year-old Natasha Moraes was discovered dead in her flat in Whetstone in Leicestershire. Her body was hidden beneath an Ottoman-style bed, naked and bound with cable ties, showing signs of brutal torture, including burns, and having suffered at least 25 separate injuries. Grant, who was aged 27, had been in a relationship with Natasha after her previous partner had died in a car crash. Prosecutors said that Grant was motivated by financial gain, specifically targeting her inheritance and torturing her to obtain money. A text sent from her phone asking for £2,000 fueled suspicion from her family. Concerned by the suspicious message, Natasha's mother and brother visited her flat. They encountered a man, later identified to be Grant, who refused entry. Police forced their way in and found her body shortly before 10 p.m. Grant had fled Leicester but was later arrested in Coventry, where police also seized a sawn-off shotgun and personal items belonging to Natasha. DNA forensics played a pivotal role in the case, and Grant's DNA was found on the cable ties used to bind Natasha, and cameras showed him purchasing identical ties in Coventry just hours before the murder. His fingerprints were also present on the window ledge from which he escaped. During the investigation and trial, Grant fabricated a story that intruders had burst in and killed Natasha whilst holding him at gunpoint, but the jury rejected his version of events, finding the forensic and CCTV evidence overwhelmingly linking him to the attack. In February of 2024, Grant was convicted of murder at Leicester Crown Court. and on the 21st of March 2024, Grant was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 34 years, and during sentencing the judge emphasised that only a life sentence was appropriate given the brutality and premeditated nature of the crime. At number 11 is Lucas DeWitt, who was sentenced on the 22nd of March. In April 2023, Essex couple Stephen and Carol Baxter, who were 61 and 64 respectively, from West Mersey, were found dead on Easter Sunday in their conservatory armchairs. Initial appearances suggested natural causes, but further investigations revealed that they had been poisoned with fentanyl, a powerful synthetic opioid. The couple had trusted Luke DeWitt, who was 34 and an IT professional, who over the course of a decade working with their Sheramak company had ingratiated himself into their lives. Prosecutors described him as a friend and valued assistant until his true intentions emerged. From 2021 onwards, DeWitt created around 20 fake online identities, including a bogus Florida doctor and a support group contact, to manipulate Carol's thyroid treatment. He also tortured and drugged her with pills containing drugs to simulate illness and decline. On Good Friday in April 2023, DeWitt administered lethal doses of fentanyl extracted from patches originally prescribed to his late father. He spiked Carol and Stephen's drinks, monitored their collapse via hidden cameras, and left them to die as he calmly left the scene. The morning after their deaths, DeWitt wrote a fake will on his phone, naming himself as director of both Stephen and Carol's business and the named inheritor, revealing his endgame and exploitation of their trust. He was convicted unanimously at Chelmsford Crown Court in March of 2024, and Detective Superintendent Rob Kirby of the Essex Police described him as one of the most dangerous men he'd encountered, fearing he would have killed again without apprehension. On the 22nd of March 2024, the judge sentenced Lucas DeWitt to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 37 years. The judge commented that DeWitt's actions showed a desire to control others and described the killing as cruel, senseless, and calculated. At number 12 is Richard Basson, who was sentenced on the 27th of March. On the 21st of September 2023, Basson, who was aged 45, shot his 37-year-old partner, Carrie Slater, in the forehead with an illegal semi-automatic handgun at their home in Long Clawson in Leicestershire. Initially, Basson claimed during the emergency call that Carrie had been stabbed by him with a pool cue during a dispute over half a cigarette. Police and paramedics responded at around 6:45 p.m. to Basson's 999 call, finding Carrie seriously injured. Basson remained outside the bungalow, erratic and uncooperative, before eventually admitting to causing her injuries as something to do with a pool cue. Initially arrested for grievous bodily harm, further investigations revealed a gunshot wound. Officers discovered a semi-automatic pistol in the couple's garden, along with live and spent ammunition. Hospital scans confirmed Carrie died from a bullet wound to the head, and prosecutors later uncovered that Basson had fired 2 shots, one that missed and hit the wall, while the other had struck Carrie fatally, and he then attempted to dispose of the evidence. Throughout the investigation, Basson spun a web of lies, claiming that Carrie had ran into a pool cue and that she had a carving knife despite a lack of supporting evidence. He also tried to conceal the bullet and firearm after the shooting. At Leicester Crown Court in March of 2024, Basson pleaded not guilty to murder, but admitted to the firearms and ammunition offences. A jury rejected his version of events and found him guilty of murder on the 26th of March 2024. Carrie's sisters described her as a fun, loving young lady and said, "Our hearts are full of pain and our lives feel empty." And Detective Inspector Emma Matz praised the police's response and noted that Basson had showed no remorse. On the 27th of March 2024, the judge sentenced Basson to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 32 years. During sentencing, he described Basson's actions as coercive, dominant and controlling, and noted his deceitful behaviour and motive to evade responsibility. He was also given a concurrent 6-year and 30-month sentence for the offences relating to the firearms and the ammunition. At number 1 is Nicholas Metzen, who was sentenced on the 8th of April. Nicholas Metzen, who was aged 28, murdered his wife Holly Bramley, who was 26, in Lincoln in March of 2023. With the couple having separated, Metzen stabbed Holly multiple times in their flat. He then dismembered her body into at least 224 pieces using heavy-duty tools in the bathtub and stored remains in their larder and bathroom for around a week. Metzen went to extreme lengths to conceal the crime, Googling phrases such as how to get rid of a dead body, attempting to erase DNA, and sending fictional messages from Holly's account claiming that she had left voluntarily. He enlisted longtime friend Joshua Hancock, paying him £50 to transport and dump body bags in the River Witham. Stoke-on-Trent trail cameras captured some of the bags floating downstream, prompting public tip-offs and the subsequent investigation to be launched. Police uncovered extreme domestic coercion and prior violent behaviour. Metzen had earlier convictions for abuse and violating court orders, and Holly's family were present in court and described enduring immense grief and trauma. On the 8th of April 2024, having been found guilty of murder, Metzen received a sentence of life imprisonment with a minimum term of 19 years and 316 days. Hancock was sentenced to 3 years and 3 months for assisting an offender. At number 2 is Remy Gordon and Cammy Carpenter, who was sentenced on the 8th of April. In the early hours of Christmas morning in 2022, Cody Fisher was in Pop World when he bumped into Remy Gordon by accident. Following a brief exchange whereby Gordon offered to fight Cody, the situation de-escalated and the parties left without any violence occurring. But Gordon did not take this perceived slight lightly and immediately sought to find out who Cody was and seek revenge. On the 26th of December 2022, Cody and his girlfriend Jessica Chatwin went to Crane nightclub in Digbeth in Birmingham. Gordon then arrived shortly thereafter, followed by Cammy Carpenter. Once they had ascertained that security was weak, a knife was smuggled into the club. Gordon then confronted Cody before he was then attacked by multiple people, including Gordon and Carpenter. That attack ended when Cody was fatally stabbed by Carpenter and then kicked to the floor by Gordon. Both individuals then fled. Carpenter was arrested on the 27th of December 2022 before he was able to flee to Jamaica as he had planned. Gordon had sought to evade police by travelling to London, but he was arrested on the 29th of December. Both Gordon, Carpenter and another individual who was present, Regan Anderson, were charged with murder and the affray of Cody's friend Daniel Vann. On the 25th of March 2024, Gordon and Carpenter were found guilty of Cody's murder, whilst Anderson was found not guilty of murder or manslaughter. All three were found guilty of the affray involving Daniel Vann. On Monday, the 8th of April 2024, Gordon was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 26 years, and Carpenter was given life imprisonment with a minimum term of 25 years. At number 3 is Michael Davis, who was sentenced on the 10th of April. In late October of 2017, 5-week-old Ollie Davis suffered catastrophic injuries, 40 fractures, skull injuries and a snapped neck whilst in the care of his father Michael Davis, who was 29. The abuse was determined to have occurred over several days in Leicester, resulting in prolonged pain and irreversible damage. Investigations revealed serious safeguarding failures, no agency intervention despite clear signs of abuse. Davis initially denied wrongdoing, claiming accidental injury, but post-mortem the doctors attributed the injuries to violent shaking and deliberate assault. The trial of Davis culminated in a unanimous conviction for murder. Ollie's mother was later convicted of allowing serious harm. The judge noted the severity of the injuries and the vulnerability of the victim, and the fact that Davis continued to care for and interact calmly with his baby post-injury was seen as evidence of his cold detachment. The judge described the case as heart-wrenching and preventable. On the 10th of April 2024, Davis was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 22 years. His partner received 7 years for allowing serious harm to be inflicted on Ollie. At number 4 is Jake Hill, who was sentenced on the 12th of April. In the early hours of the 30th of April 2023, Jake Hill, who was 25, used a hunting knife hidden in a hedge to launch a violent rampage outside of the Eclipse nightclub in Bodmin. During a 6-hour altercation, he stabbed 4 people and inflicted a single fatal stab wound on 32-year-old rugby player Michael Ridian Allen, who died while protecting others. During the trial, Hill claimed self-defense, but the jury accepted that this was a deliberate act of violence. Evidence showed Hill had prepared for conflict by hiding the weapon before entering the venue and joining a chaotic fight with the intent to use that knife. Medical testimony confirmed a fatal depth wound to the abdomen, consistent with the use of a knife. Other victims also suffered significant trauma, including torso and limb injuries requiring surgery. The court heard that the defendant displayed no remorse and was described as enjoying a hard man image. The judge in the case condemned the knife carrying as dangerous, victimless, and cowardly, and she ruled that no mitigation justified Hill's actions, especially given his premeditation and attempt to evade discovery post-offence. On the 12th of April 2024, Hill was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 28 years. He was also sentenced for 4 counts of wounding with intent to cause grievous bodily harm. At number 5, we have 4 individuals: Arshdeep Singh, Jagdeep Singh, Shivdeep Singh, and Manjot Singh, who were sentenced on the 12th of April. On the 21st of August 2023, 23-year-old Armand Singh, a DPD delivery driver, was ambushed and brutally killed in Shrewsbury. He was repeatedly struck with an axe, golf club, wooden stave, hockey stick, shovel, cricket bat, and a knife as he delivered parcels along Berwick Avenue. The 4 principal attackers, Arshdeep Singh, who was 24, Jagdeep Singh, who was 23, Shivdeep Singh, who was 27, and Manjot Singh, who was 24, were convicted of the offence of murder. Sukhmandeep Singh, who was 24 and was considered an inside informant based in Peterborough, was convicted of a lesser offence of manslaughter. Evidence showed 8 men lying in wait, travelling in 2 vehicles, a white Mercedes and a grey Audi, and using inside information from Sukhmandeep Singh to intercept Araman during his route. He was left defenceless and died at the scene. CCTV footage and weapon disposal footage captured the suspects dumping the axe, wrapped in a hoodie, into a bin. Local tip-offs and coordinated police work led to multiple arrests shortly thereafter. The trial at Stafford Crown Court spanned 6 weeks. Jurors identified the attack as planned and merciless. The weapon selection and joint participation indicated an execution by design rather than opportunism. On the 12th of April 2024, the 4 murderers each received life imprisonment with a minimum term of 28 years, whilst Sukhmandeep Singh, who was convicted of manslaughter, was sentenced to 10 years in prison. At number 6 is Leighton Williams and Tyrone Hollywood, who was sentenced on the 18th of April. On the 18th of April 2023, Kelvin Ward, who was 50, was stabbed to death in Castle Bromwich in Birmingham in a brutal attack. Williams, who was 29, and Hollywood, who was 17, were convicted for orchestrating the assault following a failed attempt to harm his son. CCTV footage showed the pair ramming the victim's son's vehicle, chasing him, and then mercilessly stabbing Kelvin with machetes. At the trial, there was clear evidence of a group plot involving multiple co-defendants. Williams acted as the primary assailant, and Hollywood was convicted as an accomplice. Kelvin's family described him as a devoted father, and their impact statement spoke of an emotional devastation and sense of betrayal inflicted by attackers from the same community. The prosecution highlighted premeditation and canine-level brutality. Multiple independent witnesses testified to the attack's severity and weapon usage. The judge condemned the attack as a savage, merciless murder, declaring such senseless violence has no place and must be met with full accountability. On the 18th of April 2024, Williams received life imprisonment with a minimum term of 29 years. His accomplice Hollywood was also sentenced to life imprisonment and was given a minimum term of 19 years. At number 7 is Cohen Foucault Fisher, who was sentenced on the 19th of April. On the 28th of May 2023 in Plymouth, Stephen Shotton, who was 50, suffered life-threatening injuries during a violent assault outside of a pub. He died 9 days later. Foucault Fisher, who was 26, and James Casewell attacked him during a late-night altercation. The duo denied the offence of murder by joint enterprise, and Caswell was later convicted of manslaughter, but Foucault Fisher was found guilty of murder. Surveillance and forensic evidence showed that the force used was extreme and unnecessary to subdue a single unarmed man, and medical evidence highlighted severe head trauma and organ damage, well beyond that would be expected from a casual fight. Stephen's family described the loss of a gentle and peaceful man, and community leaders expressed concern over escalating violence on nights out. On the 19th of April 2024, Foucault Fisher was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 16 years. Casewell, who was convicted of manslaughter, received a prison sentence of 8 years. At number 8 is Saeed Hussain Kazi, who was sentenced on the 24th of April. In November 2023, 19-year-old Sachin Hawkins, a student at the University of Hull, was stabbed in the chest by his housemate Saeed Hussain Kazi during a row over music at their shared house in Hull. CCTV footage and eyewitness testimony showed the pair exchanging insults, and Hussain Kazi then pushed Hawkins against a wall and stabbed him with a 15cm kitchen knife, causing a fatal injury. Hussain Kazi denied murder at trial and claimed that he had not intended to kill, suggesting that the violence was unplanned. His defense team argued that a moment of rage had occurred rather than the event being premeditated. Prosecutors argued that the stabbing was reckless and merciless, emphasizing that Hawkins had offered no physical threat. He was attacked whilst tidying the kitchen, and the court heard that Hussain Kazi had a prior fascination with knives and previous convictions for armed robbery. Sachin's mother delivered a victim impact statement in court, describing her son as loving and gentle. She condemned the death as senseless and irrevocably damaging to the family, and police described Hussain Kazi as a dangerous offender. The judge stated that Hussain Kazi had used a homophobic slur to initiate the altercation and then needlessly ended a life, and the judge condemned his lack of remorse and the disproportionate nature of the attack. On the 24th of April 2024, Hussain Kazi was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 18 years. At number 9 is Courtney McCleary and David Francis, who were sentenced on the 29th of April. On the 28th of April 2023 in Nottingham, 22-year-old Devices Anderson was stabbed to death in the lobby of a block of flats at High Cross, Leeds. McCleary, who was 54, had delivered the fatal blow, and Francis, who was 61, joined in the attack before stepping over the wounded victim and fleeing. Devices staggered into the foyer and collapsed, and CCTV footage captured the violence and the defendant stepping over him. Emergency services were called, but he died later in hospital. McCleary claimed initially that the stabbing had resulted from a struggle and Francis portrayed himself as a bystander until he intervened, but forensic evidence contradicted their accounts. The prosecution rejected the claims of self-defence, pointing to the knife wound's depth, the location, and lack of provocation, asserting that this was a deliberate act rather than a spur-of-the-moment conflict. Device's families delivered emotional statements in court, describing him as bright, respectful, caring, and full of life, praising his character and expressing their depth of loss. And investigators described the attack as brutal and senseless. On the 29th of April 2024, Courtney McCleary was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 19 years, and David Francis received a life sentence with a minimum term of 16.5 years. At number 1 is Theodore Lynch, who was sentenced on the 2nd of May. On the 5th of October 2021, Theodore Lynch attended the Norwich flat of 63-year-old Leslie Smith in connection with a drug dispute. During that visit, Lynch stabbed Leslie in the neck. Leslie's body was left undiscovered for 12 days, lying on the sofa until a neighbour reported a concern. When Leslie's body was found on the 17th of October in a decayed state, police linked Lynch to the scene through forensic and CCTV evidence. He was subsequently arrested and charged with murder. Lynch pleaded not guilty to murder, but guilty to the offence of manslaughter. The prosecution contended that the neck wound, location of the body, and the behaviour of the defendant after the killing were consistent with an intentional killing rather than manslaughter by a misjudgment. At Norwich Crown Court, the trial lasted just over 2 weeks. The jury considered forensic analysis, CCTV footage, and Lynch's changing statements. When the jury returned their verdict, they found Lynch guilty of murder, rejecting his plea of manslaughter. On the 2nd of May 2024, the judge sentenced Lynch to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 22 years. The judge stated during sentencing that you and the truth do not have a passing acquaintance, and the judge noted the premeditated nature of the stabbing and the calculated post-incident conduct in attempting to conceal the crime. At number 2 is Jordan Rance, who was sentenced on the 8th of May. On the 17th of November 2023, 16-year-old Jordan Rance was involved in an altercation at a property on Samuel Street in Atherton that escalated to violence. During the confrontation, Rance armed himself with a knife and stabbed 49-year-old Paul Marsh. Despite emergency treatment, Paul died shortly thereafter. Rance immediately left the scene but was later arrested and charged with murder. Initial reporting restrictions were put in place due to his age, but were lifted following his conviction. At Manchester Minchell Street Crown Court, Rance stood trial as a juvenile defendant for the offence of murder. The prosecution's case focused on the use of the knife, the victim's stance, and the speed of escalation during the altercation, which showed an intent to kill or cause really serious harm. The defence case was that this was an impulsive act. However, the jury dismissed this and found the evidence of the prosecution compelling, convicting Rance of murder. On the 8th of May 2024, Rance received a sentence of life imprisonment with a minimum term of 21 years. The judge then lifted the reporting restrictions, underscoring that the juvenile's age did not alleviate the severity of the offence. The judge also highlighted that the deliberate use of a weapon in a moment of conflict required a severe sentence, regardless of Rance's age. At number 3 is Piran Dita Khan, who was sentenced on the 10th of May. Khan was the mastermind behind a plan to rob Universal Express in Bradford on the 18th of November 2005. In total, 7 people were involved in the plot, including Khan. When the alarm was activated during the armed robbery, PC Beshivnevsky and PC Milburn, both of whom were unarmed, responded to the incident. One of the gunmen, upon encountering the officers, fired at both of them, fatally wounding PC Beshivnevsky and injuring PC Milburn. They then made good their escape. 6 suspects were arrested and 3 were later convicted of murder and were sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 35 years. Khan, however, fled the country and remained at large for 14 years before he was arrested in Islamabad in Pakistan. It took a further 3 years for the UK to secure his extradition, which was granted in April of 2023. He denied murder and stood trial at Leeds Crown Court, where he was found guilty of murder. And on the 10th of May 2024, he was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 40 years at the age of 75. Khan later died in prison in February of 2025. At number 4 is Ahmed Ali Alid, who was sentenced on the 17th of May. On the 15th of October 2023 in Hartlepool, Alid stabbed his housemate who was sleeping in the chest. Shortly thereafter, he attacked 70-year-old Terence Carney, who was out walking, and killed him. Alid later told police that the actions were revenge for Israel's actions in Gaza. The second attack occurred in a public setting and was unprovoked, indicating an ideological motive rather than personal conflict. Alid admitted to having extremist motivations, citing political grievances. At Teesside Crown Court, Alid faced charges of murder, attempted murder, and assaulting police officers. During the trial, the court heard evidence of his ideological statements that had been previously made, as well as his admissions regarding intent, and the prosecution framed the act of murder not simply as that, but also as an act of terrorism. When the jury returned to deliver their verdicts, they found Alid guilty on all counts. On the 17th of May 2024, Alid was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 45 years. The judge characterised the murder as a terrorist act designed to incite fear, and that the sentence was to reflect both the act and the extremist underpinning. At number 5 is Patrick Sharp Mead, who was sentenced on the 17th of May. On prom night in May 2022, 20-year-old Patrick Sharp Mead confronted 18-year-old Kajetan Migdal and friends as they were changing clothes after their school prom in Stevenage. Believing one of the boys had spoken to his ex-girlfriend, he attacked Kajetan with a zombie-style knife, and Kajetan died from a chest wound. The attack occurred in a confined residential area, turning a celebratory event into a lethal evening. Sharpmead had concealed the knife and targeted Kajetan directly. He then discarded the weapon and attempted to evade detection. Sharpmead was arrested and charged with the offence of murder. He pleaded not guilty and stood trial at Luton Crown Court in early May. Evidence presented during the trial included CCTV footage and forensic corroboration of the stabbing. His defence was that of misunderstanding and self-defence. The jury deliberated and returned a guilty verdict, concluding that the attack was intentional. On the 17th of May 2024, the judge sentenced him to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 28 years. The judge described the method of the attack, using a zombie-style knife, as stark and aggressive. At number 6 is Karen Vamplew, who was sentenced on the 20th of May. On the 15th of December 2021, Karen Vamplew entered the bedroom of her disabled immobile mother-in-law, Elizabeth Vamplew, who was asleep. She set fire to the bed intentionally while Elizabeth lay in it. The fire quickly affected Elizabeth, causing fatal burns and smoke inhalation. Vamplew later feigned concern and called emergency services in a staged reaction. Arson investigators found accelerant staining and ignition traces localised to the bed, indicating deliberate intent. An additional context revealed that Vamplew had financial motive. She had drained Elizabeth's account prior to the incident. At Leicester Crown Court, Vamplew was tried and found guilty of murder following a 4-week trial. Her defence that the fire was accidental was contradicted by the forensic reconstruction, as well as evidence of a financial motive. On the 20th of May 2024, Vamplew was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 32 years. the judge remarked that this case was wicked and terrible and was framed by a betrayal of trust and calculated harm. At number 7 is Lee Francis Burns, who was sentenced on the 22nd of May. On the 9th of November 2023 in Oldham, Lee Francis Burns and his acquaintance Vincent McDonough had been together earlier in the evening. A disagreement occurred which escalated into physical violence. Burns attacked Vincent, who collapsed outside and later died. The attack took place late at night on Abbey Hills Road. Witnesses reported seeing Burns flee the scene following the attack. The fatal injuries were consistent with a sustained assault, with forensic analysis supporting murder rather than an accident or self-defence. Burns pleaded not guilty and was tried at Manchester Crown Court. The prosecution emphasised that this was an unprovoked and disproportionate attack, while defence argued that the actions were in self-defence. When the jury returned to deliver their verdict, they found Burns guilty of murder. On the 22nd of May 2024, Burns was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 20 years. The judge underscored that a loss of control due to alcohol did not excuse the use of lethal force, and the sentence reflected the need for deterrence. At number 8 is Mohammed Nur, who was sentenced on the 23rd of May. Between the 29th of April and the 1st of May 2023 in Brixton in London, Mohammed Nur carried out a series of unprovoked knife attacks against random strangers. On the 1st of May, he slashed the throat of 31-year-old Joanita Dogby in broad daylight. In the days preceding the murder, Nur had injured other people with a makeshift blade. The indiscriminate nature of the attacks illustrated a pattern rather than a single moment of madness. At the Old Bailey, Nur pleaded guilty to the offence of murder as well as weapons offences, whilst he pleaded not guilty to the remaining charges. A jury convicted him of unlawful wounding in relation to the other attacks, and the total picture conveyed a sustained threat over multiple days. On the 23rd of May 2024, the judge sentenced Nur to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 32 years. The judge remarked that Nur was someone who was extremely dangerous. At number 9 is Liam Jones, who was sentenced on the 23rd of May. On the 30th of November 2022, Philip Breach, who was aged 59, was found critically injured in Wood Farm Park in Oxford with multiple head wounds. A passerby called for assistance and police and paramedics responded. Despite their intervention, Philip succumbed to his injuries. The injuries he sustained were consistent with a targeted attack rather than an accident or assault in conflict, and surveillance footage and subsequent investigation identified Jones as the suspect, and he was later arrested. The Jones had a prior criminal record, and evidence of that was presented at his trial at Reading Crown Court, where he stood trial for the offence of murder. The prosecution presented forensic evidence and contextual analysis of his motive, and the jury also considered his criminal history as part of their deliberations. When they returned their verdict, they convicted him by a majority verdict, and on the 23rd of May 2024, the judge sentenced Jones to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 37 years. During sentencing, the judge emphasised his violent history and the randomness of this attack. At number 10 is Wesley Attic, who was sentenced on the 24th of May. On the evening of the 23rd of October 2023, 34-year-old John Davis was assaulted in a pedestrian underpass in Milton Keynes. He sustained head and facial injuries which were later determined to have been caused by blunt force trauma. He was taken to hospital and he died 3 days later. Wesley Attic, who was 26 from Gleb Farm in Milton Keynes, was identified as the attacker. Investigation by Thames Valley Police's Major Crime Unit led to his arrest, and he subsequently was charged with murder. The nature of the attack, which was sudden, confined, and involved an unarmed pedestrian, suggested an isolated and deliberate confrontation rather than self-defence or accidental harm, and Attic left the scene immediately after the assault and did not assist John. At Oxford Crown Court on the 19th of April 2024, Attic pleaded guilty to one count of murder, and on the 24th of May 2024, he was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 15 years. At the sentencing hearing, the judge described the incident as a brutal and horrific attack. At number 11 is Fiona Beale, who was sentenced on the 30th of May. Between late October and early November 2021, Fiona Beale, who was a primary school teacher in Northampton, stabbed her partner, Nicholas Billingham, in the neck at the home that they shared. She had lured him to bed with a promise of sex and had prepared a knife in her dressing gown pocket and used cable ties and a sleep mask to restrain him whilst the attack took place. After the killing, she concealed the body in a shallow grave she had constructed in the side garden. In the months that followed, she maintained the appearance of normality, claiming to others that he had left her and used his phone to send messages purporting to be from him. She had kept a detailed journal later discovered by police, which clearly demonstrated premeditation, including entries such as "moving a body is much more difficult than it looks on TV," and descriptions of planning the attack through an alter ego she referred to as Tulip 22. Beale's first trial commenced at Northampton Crown Court in 2023, but this was aborted due to a legal issue involving a defence witness. In April 2024, a second trial began at the Old Bailey. Beale had initially pleaded guilty to the offence of manslaughter by reason of loss of control, but then changed her plea mid-trial to guilty, recognising that her diminished responsibility and loss of control defences were significantly weakened by the prosecution evidence. On the 30th of May 2024, the judge sentenced Beale to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 20 years. The judge noted during sentencing that having moved and buried the body in the garden, you then lied to his mother, numerous friends, all his family and yours as to what you had done and where he was. At number 12 is Stephanie Langley, who was sentenced on the 30th of May. On the 11th of September 2023, Stephanie Langley confronted 52-year-old Matthew Bryant, her former brother-in-law, outside of the Hare and Hounds pub in Maidstone at around 6 p.m. They had previously argued earlier that evening. Following that initial confrontation, Langley then retrieved a large kitchen knife from her vehicle and returned to the scene shortly afterward. As Matthew was on the phone with 999 operators, Langley approached him, knocked his phone from his hand, and stabbed him twice in the back and once in the chest, and the wounds were fatal and unsurvivable. The attack was unprovoked and occurred in broad daylight, observed by pub patrons and passers-by. Langley remained at the scene afterwards and was arrested by Kent police and charged with the offence of murder as well as possession of a knife in a public place. At Maidstone Crown Court, Langley denied the charge of murder but pleaded guilty to the offence of possessing an offensive weapon. She stood trial for murder, with evidence presented including CCTV footage, the audio of Matthew's 999 call, and her own prior statement expressing an intent to kill. After a trial concluding in early May 2024, the jury found Langley guilty of murder. On the 30th of May 2024, the court sentenced Langley to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 24 years. Number 1 is Hussain Douglas, who was sentenced on the 4th of June. On the 1st of October 2023, outside of Maggie's nightclub in Halifax, 19-year-old Hussain Douglas stabbed to death Joshua Clark, who was 21, and Hadir Shah, who was 19, after an argument had erupted involving a woman. A third victim, Brandon Coop, was also stabbed, but he survived the attack. The incident unfolded after Douglas saw Hadir speaking with someone he was interested in, which triggered a violent escalation. The attack was swift and involved multiple victims. The chaos on the street as the violence unfolded made it clear that the assault was intentional and not a spontaneous act of self-defense, and there was no indication that the victims posed a threat to Douglas. Instead, the confrontation appeared personal. Douglas stood trial at Bradford Crown Court, and at that trial the prosecution presented evidence of the deliberate use of a knife, eyewitness evidence, and the sequence of events leading up to the stabbing. The defence case consisted of challenging the evidence of provocation and intent. On the 12th of March 2024, the jury found Douglas guilty of the double murder. And on the 4th of June 2024, Douglas was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 28 years. The judge said, "You drew the knife, you opened the knife, and then you used the knife to stab Josh, Hadir, and then Brandon in rapid succession." Another individual called Yashin Iqbal was found guilty of assisting an offender and was sentenced to 12 months in a youth offenders institute. At number 2 is Tony Adams, Dale Haywood, and Neil Conahan, who were sentenced on the 4th of June. On the 17th of September 2022, 17-year-old Callum Riley was stabbed to death at a house in Haywood, Rochdale, over a £180 drug debt. Callum was found unresponsive in a garden with a deep stab wound to his leg. A friend of Callum was also found seriously injured with a stab wound to his stomach, but he survived after receiving emergency medical treatment. After they were discovered, a murder investigation was launched, and a trail of blood led the police to the house of Tony Adams, where it became clear that the two victims had been stabbed in the doorway of the house. Adams had been seeking to recover a drug debt from Callum for a number of months. Prior to the murder, Adam and 4 other men had forced their way into Callum's house, where he lived with his mother and brother. Callum was not home at the time, but the 5 men threatened his family in an attempt to intimidate him and enforce the debt. Matters came to a head on the 16th of September 2022, when Adams made threats to another of Callum's friends, after allegedly hearing rumours that the friend was going to grass about the location of his stash of drugs. Following this, Adams gathered a group of men and went to Callum's house, where they smashed the front windows with a baseball bat. Callum was not home at the time, although his mother, who is suffering from a serious illness, discovered the damage. Callum was told of the damage and went to Adams' house with a friend to confront them about the damage that had been caused. Adams, Dale Haywood and Niall Conaghan had armed themselves with weapons, including a baseball bat and a knife, and were lying in wait for the pair, and they began launching an attack within seconds of them entering his garden. The pair managed to run from the address and were chased up Athol Drive. Callum only made it a short distance before succumbing to his injuries. He was found unresponsive later that morning by a member of the public. Following a trial, all 3 men were found guilty of the murder of Callum at Manchester Crown Court. And on the 4th of June 2024, Adams and Haywood were sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 24 years. Conaghan was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 8 years. Conaghan's age would have been a factor in the difference in the sentence compared with the other 2 individuals. At number 3 is Zoe Ryder and Nicola Lethbridge, who were sentenced on the 5th of June. On the 9th of August 2023 in Sheffield, Zoe Ryder, who was 36, and Nicola Lethbridge, who was 45, lured their neighbour Stephen Kosesarski into his flat. During a drug-fueled episode, they falsely accused him of being a paedophile and attacked him, inflicting multiple injuries. The pair filmed parts of the attack on their mobile phones, including taunts, threats of mutilation, and verbal abuse, and they also robbed him of valuables during the assault. Stevens sustained 22 injuries around his head, face, and body, and he died 2 days later from the sustained trauma. The attack was extreme both in duration and intensity. At Sheffield Crown Court, the trial lasted nearly 3 weeks. The prosecution presented video footage, forensic injury analysis, and phone evidence showing the planning and sadistic nature of the attack. The jury convicted both women of murder and robbery. And on the 5th of June 2024, each woman was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 26 years. The judge stated during sentencing that whilst they may not have intended to kill Stephen, they did intend to cause serious harm, breaking his nose and causing a bleed on the brain. The judge said, "You set about him in the most brutal, heartless and despicable manner, and you launched a vicious and extremely violent joint attack upon him." At number 4 is Robert Brown, who was sentenced on the 7th of June. In November of 2023, Robert Brown murdered Victoria Greenwood, who was 41, and then attempted to conceal the crime by burning her body in a remote car park in Wallington in Hertfordshire. Victoria was a sex worker who had arranged to meet Brown at his flat in the early hours of the 10th of November. She was attacked by Brown and suffered skull fractures as a result of being hit by a heavy blunt object. She was seen on CCTV footage on the ground outside of his flat trying to escape before being dragged back inside by Brown, who was naked. During the course of the murder investigation, the police found that Brown had made multiple trips to different shops over the weekend, buying items including a saw, a foldable sack barrow, a jerry can, and a large amount of cleaning supplies. On the 12th of November, CCTV footage recorded him using the sack barrow to transport a furniture unit wrapped in duct tape containing Victoria's body from his flat to his car. Victoria's body was discovered in a burnt condition, indicating deliberate concealment. At the trial for murder, the prosecution relied on Brown's own admissions via text and forensic evidence of the burning. His claim of accidental death was tested and dismissed. The jury convicted Brown of murder, concluding that the killing was deliberate and accompanied by efforts to conceal it. Brown had earlier pleaded guilty to obstructing a coroner in the exercise of their duty, but had denied murdering Victoria. And on the 7th of June 2024, Brown was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 20 years. At number 5 is Mohammed Al-Anizi Hamid, who was sentenced on the 7th of June. On the 15th of August 2023 in Manchester, Hamid, along with 2 others, stabbed Ahmed Al-Sharan, who was 33, and pushed him into the canal in Manchester city centre. Ahmed was able to pull himself out of the water, but having sustained a stab wound to his heart, died several weeks later in hospital. Another man was also stabbed by the group, but survived his injuries. Hamid, along with 3 others, Hussain, Mahalhal, and 2 17-year-old boys, were arrested in connection with the stabbings and were tried at Manchester Crown Court. During the trial, evidence was heard, including the phrases, "Come bring me the knife," "Go get a knife," and "Let's kill him," which was heard by passers-by in the nearby area, and the 4 men were seen running away on the canal towpath. Their words were later confirmed to have been said by Hamid. Hamid and one of the 17-year-old boys were found guilty of murder and wounding with intent to cause grievous bodily harm in respect of the other individual who survived. Mahalhal and the other boy were found guilty of wounding with intent to cause grievous bodily harm. On the 7th of June 2024, Hamid received life imprisonment with a minimum term of 24 years, with a further 4 years for the wounding. The 17-year-old boy, who could not be named at the time, received 13 years, with a further 2 years for the wounding. He has now been named as Nasir al-Shamari. Mahalhal received 5.5 years in prison, and the other boy received 2.5 years in prison. At number 6 is Michael Beach, who was sentenced on the 10th of June. On the 8th of December 2023, Michael Beach, who was aged 46 and living in Cinderford, killed his friend Scott Hopkins by stabbing him in the chest with a kitchen knife at around 10:20 p.m. The 2 men, who often socialised together, had been at the pub for 5 hours, leaving about 8 p.m. after Beach had drank 5 or 6 cans of lager. The men then went to another individual's flat, when Scott followed Beach into the kitchen. Beach claimed he had picked up a kitchen knife to chop up some cannabis, but when he turned around, Scott walked straight into the knife. Despite the efforts of officers and paramedics, Scott died at the scene. Beach claimed that he had acted in self-defence after Scott pushed him when giving him a hug. However, he was arrested and charged with murder. He pleaded guilty to manslaughter but denied intentionally killing Scott. The case was heard at Gloucester Crown Court, and at the trial, Beach attempted to portray the incident as an accidental act rather than intentional killing. His version of events involves being surprised by Scott and not actively seeking to harm him. The prosecution presented forensic findings showing that the stabbing was neither accidental nor minor. The wound was extensive and inconsistent with Beach's explanations. Witness evidence and medical reports were central in undermining the claim of self-defense. The jury deliberated for about 4 hours and then found Beach guilty of murder. And on the 10th of June 2024, Beach was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 17 years. The judge stated that Beach cruelly robbed Scott's family of him. The highly distressing nature of this case is accentuated by the fact that we simply do not know why you did what you did. At number 7 is Yaro Varibros, who was sentenced on the 19th of June. On the 23rd of July 2023, at an end-of-term party held in a marquee on a farmhouse in West Sussex, Varibros, who was aged 16, stabbed fellow student Charlie Cossa, who was 17, 3 times in the chest on a crowded dance floor. Neither individual knew each other prior to a fight breaking out on the dance floor between them and 2 other boys. One of the other attendees at the party accidentally filmed the fight as she was filming her friends dancing in the marquee at the event. Varibros fled the scene covered in blood and later burned his bloodstained clothes in a garden fire pit before surrendering to police. Charlie remained conscious after the attack but suffered a cardiac arrest on his way to hospital. Sadly, he died in hospital 2 days later, on the 25th of July. Varibros initially pleaded guilty to murder, but before he was sentenced, he withdrew his appeal and went to trial. He was tried at Brighton Crown Court and was found guilty of murder and possession of a bladed article, with the jury rejecting his self-defense arguments. On the 19th of June 2024, Varibros was jailed for life with a minimum term of 16 years. During the sentencing, the judge stated, "Instead of what should have been an end of academic year celebration, Charlie was stabbed on a crowded marquee dance floor. The impact of the loss of Charlie to his family and friends is immeasurable." At number 8 is Khalid Nur, Mohammed Al-Gamri, Yaqub Musa and Fraz Siad Ahmed, who were sentenced on the 20th of June. In October 2022 in Slough, a group of men attacked and killed Kyron Lee, a 21-year-old cyclist, in an unprovoked assault. Nur, El-Gamri, Musa and Siad Ahmed were implicated in the killing, which involved a coordinated attack on Kyron on his journey to college. The attack was described as senseless, noting that the victim had no connection to the assailants. Evidence at trial included CCTV footage and eyewitness testimony confirming the coordinated nature of the assault. All 4 men were convicted of murder at Reading Crown Court. During the case, the prosecution said he got up and ran. The attackers, having stabbed him in the street where he fell, gave chase. He was murdered in effectively a planned execution with multiple machetes or large knives. Kyron died at the scene after suffering injuries to his chest, leg, head and arm. And Al-Gamri, a university student at Gallions Reach in London, was said to have been the person most likely to have struck the final and fatal wound. On the 20th of June 2024, the 4 men were sentenced as follows. Nur was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 26 years. Al-Gamri was given a minimum term of 25 years. Musa was given a minimum term of 23 years and 9 months, and Siad Ahmed was given life imprisonment with a minimum term of 23 years. Following the sentencing, Kyron's mother, Donna Lesnar, paid tribute to an amazing young man with a beautiful, caring and selfless nature. Kyron was more than my son. He was my rock, my biggest supporter, and he made me proud to be his mother. At number 9 is Algar Latondo and Halgon Randon, who was sentenced on the 25th of June. On the 16th of February 2023, in Hare Hills in Leeds, Latondo, who was 33, and Randon, who was 44, targeted 27-year-old Danico Ferguson, stabbing him 5 times, including a fatal wound to his groin, as retribution over a drug-related dispute. The men tracked him down on bicycles after being told that he had stolen from a friend of theirs. Danico was found bleeding in the street by a passing taxi driver and died shortly thereafter in hospital. A number of suspects were arrested over the following days, including Latondo, who was arrested at Heathrow Airport as he tried to leave the country. Both Latondo and Randon were subsequently charged with murder. They stood trial at Leeds Crown Court, where both men were convicted of murder. Evidence included descriptions of how they had pursued their victim on bicycles and executed the stabbing. On the 25th of June 2024, both men were sentenced to life imprisonment, with both men receiving minimum terms of 27 years. The judge described the attack as a chilling example of revenge killing executed with violence and a disregard for life. At number 10 is Victor Edward Raja, who was sentenced on the 25th of June. On the 30th of September 2023, Raja murdered 59-year-old Sydney Palmer after he received a single stab wound whilst trying to intervene in a dispute in Leicester city centre. Leicestershire police said a fight broke out between Nathan Pritchard and another man in Conduit Street at about 6:15 p.m. on the 30th of September. Pritchard was then punched by another different man outside of a shop in London Road in retaliation. Back in Conduit Street, police said that Pritchard challenged the first man and called Michael Bolin, who then threatened the same man at around 7 p.m. Raja then received a call from Bolin and made his way to the scene carrying a knife. Prosecutors believe that Raja was instructed by Pritchard to attack the person that he had been arguing with. Raja saw the man and a fight started, with Raja violently punching him. Several people nearby intervened, one of which was Sydney, who tried to pull Raja away. CCTV footage shows 25-year-old Raja brandishing the knife and swinging towards Sydney, missing once before striking him with a single stab wound to the chest. Sydney was taken to hospital, where he died a short time later. A number of people were charged in relation to Sydney's death, and Raja was found guilty of his murder on the 5th of June 2024 after a trial at Leeds Crown Court. On the 25th of June, Raja was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 26 years. Prior to the trial, Pritchard pleaded guilty to the manslaughter of Sydney, and another individual called Diana Bodrug, who was 48, admitted the offence of assisting an offender. Bolin, who had pleaded not guilty to manslaughter, was convicted of that offence. For their crimes, Bolin was sentenced to 8 years in prison, Pritchard was sentenced to 6 years in prison, and Bodrog was sentenced to 2 years and 6 months in prison.